So I've titled this last unit, Life, Being, and Death. And this is something that I always like to do in my intro classes at the end, in the final unit, because a lot of the things that we've been talking about up until this point are pretty abstract, right? You might not think they have a lot of value or practicality for your life. For example, what is this thing made of? What does that matter? Ethics, I would say, matters. The social and political philosophy we've been looking at, I think, matters. But perhaps to you, what we're investigating in this last unit will matter even more. Should you follow a particular religion? What kind of philosophy of life is one that's going to bring you meaning and comfort and security, fulfillment? Have you worked that out yet? Have you even asked these questions? Well, we're going to be asking these big questions in this last unit. And I don't know if we're going to come to settled answers on them, but it should give you a lot to think about. And that's what I hope that you ultimately get out of the class, is that thinking about these things can actually add a lot of value and direction to your life. So, we're going to kick it off by looking at a rather hopeful reading. One that was written by Helen Keller. Now, I'm sure most of you know who Helen Keller is, but in case you don't, incredible woman who lived a very difficult life. Somebody who you might say had 2 disabilities that she was struggling with. And yet she went on to get an education. She went on to be a prolific author and writer. And it is in this little book that she encourages us to approach life with an optimistic disposition. Why? Well, as we'll see, because she thinks that unless you look at things with a certain hope and faith, the odds that you're actually going to achieve anything are incredibly low. So let's see what you all think about that. I'm going to do some reading here. We'll stop occasionally. I'm going to ask you all what you think about this. How the reading is striking you. What kinds of thoughts are popping up. So we're kind of jumping in the middle, but that's okay. I don't think we need to read the first 2 chapters. If you'd like to, you can follow along on your laptops or tablets. Otherwise, just look at the screen. That's something we are all very good at, right? She says, "The test of all beliefs is their practical effect in life. If it be true that optimism compels the world forward and pessimism retards it, that is, slows it or draws it back, then it is dangerous to propagate a pessimistic philosophy. One who believes that the pain in the world outweighs the joy and expresses that unhappy conviction only adds to the pain. Schopenhauer is an enemy to the human race. Even if he earnestly believed that this is the most wretched of possible worlds, he should not promulgate a doctrine which robs men of the incentive to fight with circumstance. If life gave him ashes for bread, it was his fault. Life is a fair field, and the right will prosper if we stand by our guns." So let me just give you a little bit of background. Arthur Schopenhauer was a pessimistic philosopher. And he's somebody who's quite famous for saying that life is a mistake, our existence is kind of an accident, and what we should ultimately do to conquer our own wills, which strives to keep us alive, is just starve ourselves to death. That's what we should do. So what do you think about that view? And what do you think about what Keller is saying here? Does pessimism add to the suffering and pain of life? What do you think? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, say more. Why?
So, I know, when I'm around people that are pessimistic, it puts me down a little bit. And
Okay.
I don't like that. So, I'd rather be optimistic in that way. Because usually when you think that something's going to go negatively, it does. So, how you frame your mind.
Okay, so you think... Okay, so in your experiences with pessimistic people, You don't come out feeling happy and rejuvenated.
No.
You come out sad. And how does that affect other areas of your life?
It makes me maybe second guess myself in terms of how I'm feeling about that particular situation.
Okay. Okay, maybe it might not help you achieve the things you want to achieve in the moment, or reach for the things that you're pursuing. Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Is she right or is she wrong? Half right, half wrong? Yeah.
I agree. I feel like if you look down on things all of the time, then you're only going to make yourself feel worse, but it's also going to like affect the people around you as well. Whereas like if you look more towards an optimistic point of view and you think more happy, and even though you're in like a terrible situation, you can try to make the most out of it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You might be asking, what exactly are the differences between these views ultimately? What does it mean to have a pessimistic view or an optimistic view, and what kinds of effects do they have? Well, let's see what she says, because she has a lot to say about why this worldview should be adopted by all of us. This view that maybe we should call it a disposition, to have some sort of trust and faith that things are actually going to work. Let pessimism once take hold of the mind, and life is all topsy-turvy, all vanity and vexation of spirit. There is no cure for individual or social disorder, except in forgetfulness and annihilation. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, says the pessimist, for tomorrow we die. If I regarded my life from the point of view of the pessimist, I should be undone. I should seek in vain for the light that does not visit my eyes and the music that does not ring in my ears. I should beg night and day and never be satisfied. I should sit apart in awful solitude, a prey to fear and despair. But since I consider it a duty to myself and to others to be happy, I escape a misery worse than any physical deprivation. Okay, so if you have a pessimistic outlook, what are the effects of that? Yeah.
You really don't take any joy in anything that you do. You break up yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you might like revel in misery, or maybe revel's not even the right word. Sit in misery. Yeah, okay, so that can affect you personally. But what is she saying about our social reality? Yeah.
I think she's trying to say you like miss out on all present joy because you're too worried about like the misfortunes that are bound to happen at some point.
Yeah, she's definitely saying that in part, right? Look, if I regarded my life from the point of view of the pessimist, I should be undone. I would seek for things I would not be able to get. I'd beg night and day and never be satisfied. This is something that a lot of thinkers have argued, that there's a kind of peace and security that comes with establishing a contentment in the little things of life, right? Being grateful for what it is that you have. It's easy to be negative, right? And we focus on the negative things. That's kind of our natural tendency. But if you just looked at life negatively, speaking socially now, would you ever try to change anything? Let's say you're looking at U.S. society, and you're like, it's corrupt, it's racist, it's sexist, it's bad, everything sucks, I can't afford a house, the whole world is shit. If you don't have any faith or trust that things will get better, will they ever get better? What do you think? Yeah.
I feel like if you always have a negative outlook on things, like it's kind of being I am a negative person, and my sister's doing the opposite. So she's always like happy all the time. Like, again, the complete opposite. So like, it's definitely an impact when you're like happy, but like obviously everyone can't be happy because I mean in life you don't get your way all the time.
Yeah?
But it's also a good thing to try to get rid of negativity because without like being negative, then everything's just negative all the time. It's like there's no positive.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I think she's saying is that if you don't hold out any possibility for the hope of things changing, things are never going to change. Why? Nobody would have the motivation or the desire to do anything that would change things. They would just accept the terrible state of affairs. And they'd be sad about it, right? Obviously, that wouldn't be good for them. It wouldn't feel good. And to those who are suffering, it wouldn't be good either, right? Okay, let's see what else she says here. Who shall dare let his incapacity for hope or goodness cast a shadow upon the courage of those who bear their burdens as if they were privileges? The optimist cannot fall back, cannot falter, for he knows his neighbor will be hindered by his failure to keep in line. He will therefore hold his place fearlessly and remember the duty of silence. Sufficient unto each heart is its own sorrow. He will take the iron claws of circumstance in his hand and use them as tools to break away the obstacles that block his path. He will work as if upon him alone depended the establishment of heaven on earth. We have seen that the world's philosophers, the sayers of the word, were optimists. So also are the men of action and achievement, the doers of the word. Dr. Howe found his way to Laura Bridgman's soul because he began with the belief that he could reach it. English jurists had said that the deaf-blind were idiots in the eyes of the law. Behold what the optimist does. He controverts a hard legal axiom. He looks behind the dull, impassive clay and sees a human soul in bondage and quietly, resolutely sets about its deliverance. His efforts are victorious. He creates intelligence out of idiocy and proves to the law that the deaf-blind man is a responsible being. So she's obviously drawing on personal experience here, right? If you know Helen Keller's story, when she was growing up, her school teachers and educators thought she was an idiot. That she had cognitive disabilities and that she couldn't learn. That there was no point in trying to teach her. But through everything that she had experienced, she still strove forward. And she ended up writing and getting a lot of books published. And now, how many people have heard of her, right, in the Western world? Despite the fact that she was suffering from these disabilities. So, what I think she's trying to relay to us here is we don't have to be happy all the time. It's okay to be sad, but we have to hold at least some hope that things are possible and that we'll be able to make things happen. Because if we don't have that kind of faith or hope, again, are we ever really going to do or try anything? And maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't want to do or try anything. But have you reflected on that? Do you want to make something of yourself? Are you interested in achieving something or leaving behind a lasting legacy? If so, at least according to Keller, you can't just sit in your misery and despair and be comfortable with that. Okay, let's continue on. When Hui offered to teach the blind to read, he was met by pessimism that laughed at his folly. Had he not believed that the soul of man is mightier than the ignorance that fetters it, had he not been an optimist, he would not have turned the fingers of the blind into new instruments. No pessimist ever discovered the secret of the stars, or sailed to an uncharted land, or opened a new heaven to the human spirit. St. Bernard was so deeply an optimist that he believed 250 enlightened men could illuminate the darkness which overwhelmed the period of the Crusades. And the light of his faith broke like a new day upon Western Europe. John Bosco, the benefactor of the poor and the friendless of Italian cities, was another optimist. Another prophet who, perceiving a divine idea while it was yet afar, proclaimed it to his countrymen. Although they laughed at his vision and called him a madman, yet he worked on patiently, and with the labor of his hands he maintained a home for little street waifs. In the fervor of enthusiasm, he predicted the wonderful movement which should result from his work. Even in the days before he had money or patronage, he drew glowing pictures of the splendid system of schools and hospitals, which should spread from one end of Italy to the other. And he lived to see the organization of the San Salvador Society, which was the embodiment of his prophetic optimism. When Dr. Seguin declared his opinion that the feeble-minded could be taught, again people laughed, and in their complacent wisdom said he was no better than an idiot himself. But the noble optimist persevered, and by the reluctant pessimists saw that he whom they ridiculed had become one of the world's philanthropists. Thus the optimist believes, attempts, achieves. He stands always in the sunlight. Someday the wonderful, the inexpressible, arrives and shines upon him, and he is there to welcome it. His soul meets his own and beats a glad march to every new discovery, every fresh victory over difficulties, every addition to human knowledge and happiness. So think about all of the great people who have ever existed, who have accomplished something. Those who discover new lands, or map it, or create a new mathematical theorem, or run an awesome scientific experiment that gives us more and more knowledge about how the universe works. Keller is saying, if these people were pessimists, they wouldn't have been able to do any of that. Do you agree with her? Yeah?
I don't have a very deep understanding of pessimism, but I feel like she's kind of using her own definition. I feel like a lot of people who would consider themselves pessimists would probably have a different one than the one she's using.
Ah, okay.
I think she's being very one-sided about it, even if I don't really personally agree with pessimism.
Okay. Yeah, well, what do you think pessimism means? If someone says they're pessimistic, what do you think they mean?
I always kind of saw pessimism, however you pronounce it, as instead of being like everything sucks, we're all going to die, more being like a lack of purpose, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's actually correct, though, because I'm not like an expert on that stuff.
I'm not either. I would think about, if somebody told me they were pessimistic, I would think, they think things are not going to get better, that they're probably going to get worse. They probably don't have a lot of hope in their own life. That's what I would think.
I think maybe I'm getting it confused with nihilism.
Yeah, okay. What is nihilism?
Just like, there's no purpose, there's no meaning to anything.
Right, nihilism comes in a lot of different forms. You could be a moral nihilist, and you would think there's no such thing as objective right and wrong. Right? It's all a matter of opinion, whatever. You could be an existential nihilist and think there's no purpose or meaning to my existence. It's a cosmic accident. None of it really objectively matters. But perhaps pessimism and nihilism go hand in hand. If somebody thinks that they don't have any meaning in their life or there's no purpose to life, have you met somebody like this? Were they a happy person? Were they a hopeful person? In my experience, they haven't been. So, yeah, maybe they go together. In any case, though, do you agree with her that if somebody has that kind of view of the world, it sucks, there's no objective meaning or purpose, let's say they're a pessimistic, nihilistic person, are they going to achieve anything great? What do you think the odds of that are? Yeah.
I think it's very slim for someone who is like negative, especially with a disability. Like they already think that they're like not normal, and then when the professor doesn't want to help them, like one, it's very stressful. So obviously, good professors be negative, and why can't the student not be negative as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Keller's kind of making a strong claim here. She's not saying that people who have ups and downs can't do great things. Even the people who have revolutionized our society and our science and our philosophy, like, look, they didn't have perfect lives. None of us have perfect lives, right? We go through happy periods, we go through depressive periods. We go through negative periods, positive periods, periods where we're angry, all that stuff. And that's just a natural part of the human experience, right? We go through these different complex emotions. But if your starting point in life is this whole thing's a shit show, I think she's going to say, you're kind of like, if we could use the analogy of life is like running a race, you're like chopping off your legs before you start. So meditate on that. And it might be wise also to think about who you are surrounding yourself with in your life. I think a lot of you would agree that somebody's environment has a huge impact on their mood and their psychology and what they're capable of and their social and economic possibilities. Are you surrounding yourselves with people who try to build you up and who want what's best for you or not? That might be something worth thinking about too. Okay, let's keep going. We have found that our great philosophers and our great men of action are optimists. So too, our most potent men of letters have been optimists in their books and in their lives. No pessimist ever won an audience commensurately wide with his genius, and many optimistic writers have been read and admired out of all measure to their talents, simply because they wrote of the sunlit side of life. Dickens, Lamb, Goldsmith, Irving, all the well-beloved and gentle humorists were optimists. Swift, the pessimist, has never had as many readers as his towering genius should command. And indeed, when he comes down into our century and meets Thackeray, that generous optimist can hardly do him justice. In spite of the latter-day notoriety of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, we may set it down as a rule that he who would be heard must be a believer, must have a fundamental optimism in his philosophy. Okay, let me just stop there because this last line is important. We may set it down as a rule that he who would be heard must be a believer. What do you think she means? You all want to be heard, right? You want people to listen to you, to take you seriously when you want to be taken seriously, to be seen, right? What does that require, according to her?
Believe in yourself and
To believe in yourself, yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. Yeah, maybe confidence has something to do with it too, because if you're very timid, are you going to say a lot to people? Yeah, I think that's a part of it. I think she's saying something even more too. What do you think?
I think that she might mean that you have to be a believer that things are going to get better. Because she is an optimist, I think to say to be heard, you have to believe that things do get better and that there is a positive spin on certain things.
Okay. So that's something that she's been talking about up until this point, right? You have to have some kind of faith or trust or hope that things are going to get better. Yes, that's a part of it. I think that's also contained in what she's saying. But I think she's saying something more general. Have you hung out with somebody who is a nihilistic, pessimistic person? Or do you know somebody in your life like this? Would they die for their pessimism? Do they believe so strongly that life has no meaning that they're willing to die over it? Or would they run away from that fight?
No, they wouldn't die from it. They'd run away.
I think what she's saying is if you want to be seen and heard, you have to live authentically. You have to have a real belief in what you espouse. It's not good enough to just say, I believe in something, and be all lukewarm about it. If you really believed in something, that would motivate you to act and think in certain ways. Think about the people that you hold up as heroes who have left behind a legacy. They had a belief, she's saying, in what they were doing. Think about the great people throughout history who fought for civil rights, or who are willing to risk their lives because they discovered something about the universe and they were not going to recant it. They believed in what they were doing. So much so that they were willing to put their lives on the line for it. And those are the people that we remember, right? We remember Martin Luther. We remember Martin Luther King Jr. Right? We remember these people who believed, who had strength. This might be something that's hard to transmit to you, because in my experience, a lot of people in your generation are very cynical and apathetic about their lives. How many people are looking at their laptops right now not really caring? Right? You don't want to be here. You don't believe in this class, right? How many things are you doing in your life that you actually believe in, that you love? And if you're not doing that, are you really living your life or are you living somebody else's life? We're going to talk about this later in the unit, but if you're not happy with how things are going for you, you have the opportunity at every moment to make a change. Yes, actions come with consequences. Maybe your parents won't be happy. But is living an inauthentic life worth it to you? Helen Keller doesn't think so. You have to believe in what you're doing. You have to do the things that you believe in. Because if you don't believe in it, are you really going to do anything great? Or are you just going to ride the current wherever these social and cultural forces take you? And then will you be remembered? Probably not. Right? He may bluster and disagree, she says, and lament, as Carlyle and Ruskin do sometimes. But a basic confidence in the good destiny of life and of the world must underlie his work. Shakespeare is the prince of optimists. His tragedies are a revelation of moral order. In Lear and Hamlet, there is a looking forward to something better. Someone is left at the end of the play to right wrong, restore society, and build the state anew. The later plays, The Tempest and Cymbeline, show a beautiful, placid optimism which delights in reconciliations and reunions, and which plans for the triumph of the external as well as the internal good. Doing what is right out there and living according to your own principles. Right? Treating yourself appropriately. If Browning were less difficult to read, he would surely be the dominant poet in this century. I feel the ecstasy with which he exclaims, "Oh, good gigantic smile of the brown old earth this autumn morning." And how he sets my brain going when he says, because there is imperfection, there must be perfection. Completeness must come of incompleteness. Failure is an evidence of triumph for the fullness of the days. Yes, discord is, that harmony may be. Pain destroys, that health may renew. Perhaps I am deaf and blind, that others likewise afflicted may see and hear with a more perfect sense. From Browning I learned that there is no lost good, and that makes it easier for me to go at life, right or wrong, do the best I know, and fear not. My heart responds proudly to his exhortation to pay gladly life's debt of pain, darkness, and cold. Lift up your burden. It is God's gift. Bear it nobly. You had the option of reading for today instead a piece that is very pessimistic. Does anybody remember who you could have chosen to read for today near the beginning of the semester? A guy who's very much in the vein of Arthur Schopenhauer. Peter Wessel Zapfa. One of my favorite essays, The Last Messiah, although it really is a Debbie Downer of an essay. Do you know what he says in that essay? Life is so full of pain and suffering and despair that we're never going to be able to eliminate it. And consequently, the ways that we are living right now are harming ourselves, others, and the environment. So much so that ultimately what we should do, we should just let ourselves die out. In the essay, The Last Messiah says something like, "Let yourselves die and let the earth be silent after ye." Now maybe in your darker moments you do feel like that is true. That the suffering and the pain of life is not worth it. But are things really that bad? Certainly we all have our burdens, right? Our traumas. Would you rather have never been born? What do you think? Yeah.
I think that would make, you don't know what the alternative is to being alive. So like, you can't really make a sound judgment on that. I don't know. You don't have enough information.
Well, if death really is the cessation of life, if that's what it means to die, I mean, there would just be nothingness, right? Like you wouldn't experience anything.
Yeah, we don't know.
But yeah, maybe you're worried, well, shoot, like, maybe there is a heaven and a hell, you know? But if you had the choice between, living the life that you're living now or never having been born, what would you choose? You can be honest. I'm not going to judge you.
I still live the life I'm living. It's not that bad.
Okay. Do you think that there are people who would choose to have never been born?
Probably, yeah. If they think their life sucks enough, then yeah.
If they go through particularly bad experiences, right? Childhood experiences, stuff like that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. But unfortunately, we don't have the choice over that, right? We find ourselves here. Here we are. We're alive. So now what are we going to do? And how are we going to approach things? That's what this final unit is all about. Keller is going to promote an optimistic position. She thinks that's what's going to be better for you and for other people. But maybe you disagree with that. Or maybe you think there's something naive about it, right? I went through a pessimistic period in my life, a very depressive period. And there was a part of me that couldn't help but look at those who were always happy and be like, you just don't understand. You just don't know. I wish I could live in your ignorance. But that's a kind of a narcissistic way to think, right? It kind of is. Because if you think you understand completely how the world works, it's going to blind you from new experiences and perspectives. You're not going to keep an open mind, right? Why would you listen to anybody if you think you know how the world works? Hopefully some of the ideas that we've been looking at in this class have broken down those barriers and have made you more willing to consume and entertain these different perspectives. That has been my ultimate goal. In any case, she continues, the man of letters whose voice is to prevail must be an optimist, and his voice often learns its message from his life. Stevenson's life has become a tradition only 10 years after his death. He has taken his place among the heroes, the bravest man of letters since Johnson and Lamb. I remember an hour when I was discouraged and ready to falter. For days, I had been pegging away at a task which refused to get itself accomplished. Y'all ever experienced that? It sucks. You're ramming your head against the wall and this thing is not getting done, and you're ready to scream. In the midst of my perplexity, I read an essay of Stevenson, which made me feel as if I had been outing in the sunshine, instead of losing heart over a difficult task. I tried again with new courage and succeeded almost before I knew it. I have failed many times since, but I have never felt so disheartened as I did before that sturdy preacher gave me my lesson in the fashion of the smiling face. Read Schopenhauer and Omar, and you will grow to find the world as hollow as they find it. Read Green's History of England, and the world is peopled with heroes. I never knew why Green's history thrilled me with the vigor of romance until I read his biography. Then I learned how his quick imagination transfigured the hard, bare facts of life into new and living dreams. When he and his wife were too poor to have a fire, he would sit before the unlit hearth and pretend that it was ablaze. Drill your thoughts, he said. Shut out the gloomy and call in the bright. There is more wisdom in shutting one's eyes than your copybook philosophers will allow. And so we reach, I think, what is the climax of her argument. Every optimist moves along with progress and hastens it, while every pessimist would keep the world at a standstill. The consequence of pessimism in the life of a nation is the same as in the life of the individual. Pessimism kills the instinct that urges men to struggle against poverty, ignorance, and crime, and dries up all the fountains of joy in the world. In imagination, I leave the country which lifts up the manhood of the poor, and I visit India, what she calls the underworld of fatalism, where 300 million human beings, scarcely men, submerged in ignorance and misery, precipitate themselves still deeper into the pit. Why are they thus? Because they have for thousands of years been the victims of their philosophy, which teaches them that men are as the grass, and the grass fadeth, that there is no more greenness upon the earth. They sit in the shadow and let the circumstances they should master grip them, until they cease to be men and are made to dance and salaam like puppets in a play. After a little hour, death comes and hurries them off to the grave, and other puppets with their pasteboard passions and desires take their place, and the show goes on for centuries. Do y'all think there has been progress in our country? What do you think? Moral progress, social progress? Or no? Mm-hmm.
I would say no. I mean, it can be debatable on that because in this country we're really like monetarily driven, and I can't.
Sure.
That's a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, as a nation. But that can bring up a lot of moral conflicts, I guess. But over time, I think they kind of decrease, and our morals were lowered.
Okay, so you think that's interesting, yeah. Because we don't have slavery anymore, right? But maybe you might say the racism has just taken a different form. Some people say that nowadays, right? Our standard of living has increased if you look at the 1800s. I mean, look at all the crap that we have. We have laptops and the Bachelorette and water bottles and Stanley Cups, Dairy Queens. Maybe you don't really like that stuff, but we're all living a lot better than our ancestors in America did. We have more money, we have more opportunity. Maybe you'll say, I don't know if I want to say there's been a lot of progress. I think there are merits to both sides. But the reason I ask is because of the point that she's making here. She says that the optimist moves along with progress and hastens it, while every pessimist would keep the world at a standstill. What do you think about that? Yeah.
I think that she's kind of seeing like a pessimist as someone who just thinks like life sucks and that like there's nothing you can do to make it better. So then like why even try? I think that's kind of how she's seeing a pessimist.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that still like a pessimist can be driven by spite or by like, well, if everything sucks, might as well like try. Like I don't know, like I feel like that's kind of like how I see a pessimist.
Okay.
So I feel like she's just kind of taking it very strongly, where they're just gonna sit in their own sorrow and not even like try or anything.
Well, do you know any pessimists?
I do. Yeah.
Or do you know any historical figures that were pessimists?
I mean, not off the top of my head.
I think I know pessimists in my life. And maybe this is just because of a lack of knowledge on my part, but I don't know many historical figures that were pessimists. So maybe that provides some reason to believe what she's saying. But I think you're right. I mean, just because somebody thinks everything sucks and things aren't likely to get better, that doesn't mean they won't do anything, right? Yeah.
Isn't she like kind of contradicting herself? Because earlier she was saying how like some authors are pessimists.
Yeah.
And like, in my opinion, like an author kind of needs to be pessimist in a way. Certain authors per se, because that's what produces good work, like literary work.
Ah.
And then like I feel like she's just contradicting herself here, saying that like, oh, a pessimist can't do anything. Well, like so many authors have created so many literary works and are like studied today. So
Yeah. Yeah, do you have any authors in mind that are like pessimists or like...
I don't know if I like classify, like you can even argue that Shakespeare was a pessimist, like because he has pessimist characters, like in The Taming of the Shrew, like a lot of his characters are pessimists. So is he technically, like then you have that debate, like if you're writing characters like that or writing people like that, do you like have an inkling of yourself that thinks that? Or are you just like projecting like other people around you in the period?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know what the mind of Shakespeare was. But I think you bring up a good point. I mean, perhaps some of the best authors that you've read are like really sad, you know? And they're just able to express to you those feelings that you have too that you just couldn't put into words. And the fact that we have their books means that they did something and they are remembered somehow, right? Yeah, so maybe she's wrong in thinking that a pessimist can't do anything.
I think it's just like unfair to how she's like saying, how she was saying earlier on, like, oh, this author made me think this, that's what you'll get when you read it, because not everyone reads literature the same.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm getting out of it, but I'm an English major, so like.
I think she's drawing more on her personal experience. I don't know if she's arguing for like an objective interpretation. But I like your point because I think it brings up something that's kind of underlying her argument that I think we should talk about. Maybe you'd think that this is a cop-out. But here's how I think she would respond to your claims. I think she might say, pessimism comes in degrees. I think you can be more or less optimistic or pessimistic. And if you're a true pessimistic, like if you're pessimistic through and through, then you're not going to do anything. What do you think about that? Is that kind of like a way to maneuver around the argument? I don't know. You might call it a cop-out. Because certainly we all have pessimistic moments, right? But we still do stuff. I don't know if any of us has done anything that is going to allow us to be remembered really for a long time, but maybe you have. That would be great. But yeah, maybe the kinds of pessimistic person she's talking about is the person who doesn't even believe in the possibility of progress. And if you didn't even believe in that possibility, you could imagine why she says, oh, well, yeah, then they're not going to help things. Things aren't going to get better under their watch. Why? Because they don't even think things can get better. So, I guess all of this is to say, maybe we all have different definitions of pessimism. And that might color our interpretation of her argument and what she's saying here. I don't know what the right definition is. I think there's some truth in here, but I doubt everything she says is true. Right? But if we take her definition, The person who, through and through, has no hope in the possibility of things getting better. Is she right when she says every pessimist would keep the world at a standstill? Mm-hmm.
I don't think it can be every pessimist. I mean, you might have some breakthroughs, like the authors, but the majority of them, if you have a negative outlook on life, you really don't see hope, you're really not going to make an impact. In my opinion, at least, because you really don't care.
You don't care. Okay. Yeah, maybe in order to change things and to actually move things forward, you have to have a certain relationship to the world. Like you actually have to care about it or love it in some sense. Maybe. Yeah.
I agree with that, but at the same time I disagree because like you could just be like living through the motions. Like if you're a factory worker, you get up, like, oh, I hate my life, I hate everything, but you go and you're there and you put things together, you're still making an impact on the world in a way. Or like, okay, let's say you get sick and then you're in the hospital, you're like a learning tool for someone else then also. So you're still making a difference.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Our decisions impact others whether we want them to or not, right? And whether or not we're trying to change things or not. That's certainly true. No doubt, the decisions that you're making in your lives, even the small ones today, are influencing other people, either for better or for worse, right? So I think that's a good point. Yeah. Your life can still and will have an influence on others. I guess the question then becomes, how much of an influence do you want to be? And what is required for that? I would say, generally speaking, if you want to have a big positive impact, try to become the best version of yourself. Try to make yourself smarter and wiser. Express love, yada yada. But that's just my own personal philosophy. She continues to bring up, I think, the philosophy of Hinduism here. When she says, go to India and see what sort of civilization is developed when a nation lacks faith in progress and bows to the gods of darkness. I think she is a Christian, right? She mentioned God earlier. So, under the influence of Brahmanism, genius and ambition have been suppressed. There is no one to befriend the poor or to protect the fatherless and the widow. The sick lie untended. The blind know not how to see, nor the deaf to hear, and they are left by the roadside to die. In India, it is a sin to teach the blind and the deaf, because their affliction is regarded as a punishment for offenses in a previous state of existence. If I had been born in the midst of these fatalistic doctrines, I should still be in darkness, my life a desert land where no caravan of thought might pass between my spirit and the world beyond. So does anybody know anything about Hindu philosophy? Yeah.
But they believe they can't go up in life. So say their job is to walk dogs for a living. They can't do anything other than that. They have to walk that dog and they die and they go up in levels.
There is a caste system, right, in a lot of these Hindu cultures. And I think there's some mobility sometimes between the castes, but often you're only allowed to marry somebody of the same caste, right? And so there is not the same kind of social and economic mobility that we have in the U.S. Yeah, so there's something there. She mentions reincarnation here. There's a reincarnation metaphysic in Hinduism. And there's also this idea of dharma. Does anybody know what dharma is? Yeah.
It's like negative energy, like what you put out, you'll receive, kind of, in a way.
I think you're thinking of karma, which sounds really close to it, right? There's an idea in Hinduism that goes something like this. The kind of life path that you are on is, well, one that you are meant to be on and one that you're supposed to live out in a certain way. There's some sort of underlying principle or plan that you should be adhering to. And your dharma might be, according to some, you're meant to live in poverty and suffer these afflictions. That is why she calls it fatalistic. She thinks that it encourages people to accept their fate, which she thinks is going to stifle progress and people getting the help that they need and the care that they need and so on. But you could completely disagree with her interpretation of Hinduism here. She obviously is not describing every piece of it. The Hindus believe in endurance, but not in resistance, she says. Therefore, they have been subdued by strangers. Their history is a repetition of that of Babylon. A nation from afar came with speed swiftly, and none stumbled or slept or slumbered, but they brought desolation upon the land, and took the stay and the staff from the people, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet and the prudent and the ancient, and none delivered them. Woe indeed is the heritage of those who walk sad-thoughted and downcast through this radiant, soul-delighting earth, blind to its beauty and deaf to its music, and of those who call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness. This is an idea that you'll see pop up a lot in your life. You've probably heard it already if you listen to lectures on YouTube or little motivational speeches and views on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But a lot of thinkers and gurus and things have said there is immense beauty on earth. If you would just open your eyes to see it. William James would say that through the emotions of our lives, we end up taking a lot of things for granted. And we lose sight of what things are and what they mean in some sense because we're so used to them. Right? That gas station that you always pass on your way to school. Or that tree that was in your yard growing up, that you're so used to being there, you don't even really look at it or register it. But Keller and others might say, if you actually attended to that tree or that relationship, you would see something that is so incredibly beautiful if you cared to look. What do you think about that? Is she just over-exaggerating how beautiful life is? Or is there something there? Do you see beauty in life? In forests, in trees, in relationships? Mm-hmm.
This is how I'm interpreting this, but I feel like what she's trying to say is, and I kind of agree, is the idea that we're so focused on thinking of life as this big picture, and how pessimists will look at it and be like, it's net negative because you spend more time sad than you are happy. But she's trying to say that you need to break it down into its individual moments and just live, be able to appreciate the small things, because if you're doing that, instead of focusing on everything at once, you'll be able to see that life is overall positive.
Yeah, I think the spirit of that is there. Yeah. If you listen to any New Age spirituality people, what do they say? Should you live in the past? Should you live in the future? No, what do they say? Present, right? Live in the present moment, man. You just gotta in the here and now. Yeah. Why? Well, some of them will say the present moment is the only thing that exists. The present moment is all that you have. But yeah, I think the Spirit is there. If we are caught living in the past or the future, we're not attending to the things that are right in front of us, right? If you're worried about what your relationship with your boyfriend is going to be in 3 months, you're missing out on the beautiful things that are happening right in front of you right now, right? If you are worried about something that happened in the past and you have a lot of anxiety and regret about that, that might prevent you from doing things in the present moment that would actually enrich your life and strengthen you, right? Grasp opportunities. This is something that's very hard to do because we live in such a fast-paced world now. All of our attention spans are shot. If a video is more than 5 minutes long, we're not going to watch it. Right? You go on Reddit and you're looking through posts and you're like, that's too long, I'm not reading that. Right? Unless it's a bite-sized clip or 2 sentences. So the speed at which all of these images and ideas are coming at us, I think a lot of people would say nowadays is preventing us from really attending fully and focusing on what's there. And I think what goes along with that idea is she's saying we need to embody a kind of spirit of gratitude, of taking stock of what it is that we have in our lives and what it is that's all around us. Because it's miraculous, or it's beautiful, or it's amazing in some sense. If we just looked. I'm going to skip the paragraph. I'm going to go to the next one. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope. When our forefathers laid the foundation of the American Commonwealths, what nerved them to their task but a vision of a free community? Against the cold, inhospitable sky, across the wilderness white with snow, oh, here you go, where lurked the hidden savage, gleamed the bow of promise, toward which they set their faces with the faith that levels mountains, fills up valleys, bridges rivers, and carries civilization to the uttermost parts of the earth. Although the pioneers could not build according to the Hebraic ideal they saw, yet they gave the pattern of all that is most enduring in our country today. They brought to the wilderness the thinking mind, the printed book, the deep-rooted desire for self-government, and the English common law that judges alike the king and the subject, the law on which rests the whole structure of our society. It is significant that the foundation of that law is optimistic. In Latin countries, the court proceeds with a pessimistic bias. The prisoner is held guilty until he is proved innocent. In England and the United States, there is an optimistic presumption that the accused is innocent until it is no longer possible to deny his guilt. Under our system, it is said many criminals are acquitted, but it is surely better so than that many innocent persons should suffer. Okay. What do you think about this legal idea that she is bringing up here? What kind of system do we have in the U.S.? What kind of legal system? She says it right in there. How do we treat people who are accused legally of something? You've heard this on Law and Order.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Innocent until proven guilty. What do y'all think about that? Is that good? Is that bad? Uh-huh.
It's kind of hard to say whether it's good or bad, because in some cases the person is actually innocent and did nothing wrong, whereas like in other situations the person is guilty.
Yeah.
And you can't really like prove that, or you can't do anything about it until you have proof.
Right. And so she says, yeah, people complain that many criminals are acquitted within this system. Right? Because there needs to be a preponderance of evidence that shows that the person did what they're accused of. Right? And she says, yes, that's bad. But it's better than the alternative, where if the system was the other way, more innocent people would suffer. And that's worse than letting people who do wrong get away with it. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Is it better to let bad people get away with things and so good people don't suffer?
Well, it depends on like the action that someone does. Like obviously, if you know someone should be held accountable for your actions and like you should be in prison for a very long time. But like if you have like a mental disability or like something that causes those actions, that like physical like scientific proof, then it is your fault, but also it's not. If that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there are a lot of distinctions that we can make, right, between, should that person be punished or just quarantined, because of what they did? Should punishment even be a thing? Is rehabilitation better? I think a lot of people would say yes, but yeah.
I think the opposite of innocent till proven guilty would be guilty till proven innocent. That makes literally no sense because you can't prove a negative. I mean, you can't just be like, well, we can't prove that you didn't murder that guy, so I guess that means you murdered him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a high bar, right? Unless you could show that somebody else did the thing, right? Maybe that would be the best strategy. But I mean, that might be really difficult, right?
I just think you can't really prove a negative in that kind of way.
Yeah. So maybe it's wise we have this kind of system. She thinks it's inherently optimistic. And she would say this is but one manifestation of what it means to look at life through this lens that has some hope and faith and trust. Not only that things are going to get better, but also in yourself and other people. And so she continues, the pessimist cries, there is no enduring good in man. The tendency of all things is through perpetual loss to chaos in the end. If there ever was an idea of good in things evil, it was impotent, and the world rushes on to ruin. But behold, the law of the two most sober-minded, practical and law-abiding nations on earth assumes the good in man and demands a proof of the bad. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. The prophets of the world have been of good heart, or their standards would have stood naked in the field without a defender. Tolstoy's strictures lose power because they are pessimistic. If he had seen clearly the faults of America and still believed in her capacity to overcome them, our people might have felt the stimulation of his censure. But the world turns its back on a hopeless prophet and listens to Emerson, who takes into account the best qualities of the nation and attacks only the vices which no one can defend or deny. It listens to the strong man, Lincoln, who in times of doubt, trouble, and need does not falter. He sees success afar, and by strenuous hope, by hoping against hope, inspires a nation. Through the night of despair, he says, all is well, and thousands rest in his confidence. When such a man censures and points to a fault, the nation obeys, and his words sink into the ears of men. But to the lamentations of the habitual Jeremiah, the ear grows dull. So I think she's saying a lot in that paragraph, but I'll just end with this. One of the important things I think she's trying to get across is the kind of attitude that you have towards life is going to affect your relationships and whether people listen to you. So if that matters to you, you should reflect on the kind of vibe that you're giving off. Right? People like being around happy people, or people who are funny and people who are nice. A lot of people don't like hanging around with people who are just Debbie Downers all the time. And they're like, hey man, how's it going? Oh, life sucks and we're all going to die. You ever think about your death? It's not very fun to listen to. And so I'll just leave you with this. I know there are things that you want to accomplish in your life. I know at times it may seem hopeless, like you might not be able to get there, that the deck is stacked against you. But there's some very real truth in the idea that you only become a failure when you've stopped trying. As long as you continue to try and pursue, success remains a possibility. So, reflect on that. Talk about this stuff with your friends and family members. And I will see you on Thursday. Okay, thank you.